We are live. Hello and welcome to episode 11 of Bangladesh in the World podcast, brought to you by the Bangladesh America Alliance. We are streaming live on X, YouTube, and Facebook. Thanks for joining us, and let's get started. I'm your moderator, Mainul Haq, and today's episode is about the untold stories of Professor Muhammad Yunus, where we are going to hear the journey of how a Bangladeshi visionary became a global icon. We're thrilled to be joined by two remarkable guests from Friends of Bangladesh, Dr. Scott Leckman and Sam Daley-Harris, both longtime champions of social justice and global impact, who have walked alongside that journey in a meaningful ways and are here to share their personal stories, insights, and reflections. Let me start off with a brief introduction to our special guest before we dive into the conversation. Sam Daley-Harris is a pioneering advocate for citizens' empowerment and global poverty reduction. He founded the Anti-Poverty Lobby Results in 1980, co-founded the Microcredit Summit Campaign with Muhammad Yunus and John Hatch in 1995, as well as he launched Civic Courage in 2012 to help grassroots advocates create real change. Inspired by the video on Grameen Bank in 1985, he helped lead groundbreaking US congressional advocacy for microcredit, generating over 100 supportive newspaper editorials. Dr. Scott Leckman is a Salt Lake City surgeon and longtime advocate for global health and poverty reduction. A 40-year volunteer and former board chair of Results, he championed microfinance and Grameen Bank's mission to empower the poor. He led surgical missions across the globe, founded ITA's Health Access Project for uninsured patients, and is a passionate Rotarian recognized worldwide for his work on polio eradication as well as humanitarian service. He also traveled to Bangladesh already two times this year, and probably the third one is on the. He's planning on a third trip probably later this year. With that said, I'm going to hand over to our host, Kausar Chaudhary from PD America Alliance to start the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mainul, and thanks to both Sam and Scott for joining us today. So, Sam, I would like to start with you. Since you were part of Professor Yunus's story from the very beginning, and when we say beginning, we go many decades back. But before we talk about your decades of work with Professor Yunus, please tell us how you got to focusing on international development in the first place. I know it is an unusual story, starting with degrees in music.
Great, thanks. It's great to be with you and with everyone who's viewing right now. So let me just say that I like to tell my origin story by using a thing developed by a Harvard professor, Marshall Gans, called The Story of Self. And it basically asks, what happened in your life and what decisions did you make that got you to this commitment? And so I urge people listening to this little story of mine to think about their story. What happened in your life and what decisions did you make to get you to this commitment? So here's mine. And it's kind of unusual. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in music. And I played percussion instruments in the Miami Philharmonic Orchestra for 12 years and taught high school music. And yet 45 years ago, I founded the Anti-Poverty Lobby Results. And a lot of times I'm asked, music, poverty lobby, what's the connection? And when I look back in my life, there's certain experiences that start pointing me in a different direction. The death of a friend around high school graduation in 1964 and the assassination of US Senator Robert Kennedy in 1968 got me to asking the questions of purpose. Why am I here? What am I here to do? What's my purpose? 9 years later, 1977, I'm invited to a presentation on ending world hunger put on by the Hunger Project. And I go to this event thinking, well, hunger's inevitable. Well, I know. I'm a musician. I mean, it's inevitable in my mind because there must be no solutions. Again, what do I know? Because I'm thinking if there were solutions, somebody would have done something by now. But I go to this event and it's obvious right away. There's no mystery to growing food, clean water, basic health, literacy. I'm not hopeless about the perceived lack of solutions. I'm hopeless about human nature. People will just never get around to doing the things that can be done. But there's one human nature I have some control over, my own, and my questions. Why am I here? What am I here to do? So I get involved in a big way. This is the end of the story. In 1978, 1979, I spoke to 7,000 high school students in the US, classroom by classroom. And before I went into the first classroom, I read some statements from Jimmy Carter's Commission on World Hunger calling for the political will to end hunger. So I asked 7,000 high school students, what's the name of your member of Congress? I don't want to know if you wrote him. I don't want to know if you met him. Just the name. Out of 7,000 students asked, 200, fewer than 3%, could answer correctly. 6,800, over 97%, could not tell me the name of their member of Congress. And results grew out of this gap between the calls for the political will to end hunger on the one hand and the lack of basic information on who represented us in Washington on the other. And so I urge people to think about, what is your story of self? What happened in your life? And what decisions did you make that got you to your commitment? And I think it's another way of saying is knowing your why and sharing it. And that's basically what the story of self is. And that set me on the path toward meeting Muhammad Yunus.
Okay, fantastic. So let's start with now how you actually got to meet Professor Yunus. What attracted you to him?
Well, let me say a couple of things. I'm going to tell this story a couple of ways. So by 1984, Results is still a bit of a fledgling little lobby group, and we were lobbying on child survival, and volunteers generated 3 editorials. I use that as a measure of empowerment, not letters to the editor, but where the volunteers met with the editorial writers and encouraged them to write a new editorial in the newspaper. And the next year we were lobbying on a UN fund, IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development. Volunteers generated something like 28 editorials. That's the year I learned about Grameen Bank, 1985. Hold on. 1986, we're lobbying on vaccinating kids around the world from vaccine preventable diseases. The volunteers generate 90 editorials. And the next year, 87, is when the volunteers are lobbying on microcredit and generate 100 newspaper not letters to the editor, but the newspapers, the Atlanta Journal, the Miami Herald, the New York Times, the LA Times, the Houston Chronicle wrote letters on microcredit and often on Muhammad Yunus. Now, how did I meet him? 1985, we were lobbying on the International Fund for Agricultural Development. The Reagan administration was trying to kill IFAD, as the Trump administration is doing on some other UN agencies. And Results was lobbying on behalf of IFAD, and they sent us 3 videos on programs that they had funded. And one of them was a Dutch documentary on a little bank in Bangladesh with 40,000 borrowers called Grameen Bank. And the name of the video was Nasma. So we made 50 copies. We had 50 chapters at that point and mailed a copy of the video, all 50 chapters. And so that was, we were learning about microcredit generally, and Grameen Bank and Muhammad Yunus specifically. I'm going to go one more step. So we start developing legislation for Congress to fund microloans, basically, for the very poor around the world in 1987. And when I first meet Professor Yunus is August 1987. The photo on the screen, which I can describe in a moment, 94, and 7 years later. But in 1987, we had 2 one-hour conference calls with 14 newspaper editorial writers on the first call and 14 on the second. So he comes to our office in Washington, D.C., and he sits down and he speaks for an hour with 14 editorial writers. They hang up, and the next hour he talks to 14 more. And that was really the moment that I met Professor Yunus as he did these editorial writer calls in 1987. Now, the photo on the screen is a photo in the Oval Office. It's 1994. President Clinton is president, and he wants to meet with Muhammad Yunus. I didn't get the meeting and bring him along. He got the meeting and brought me along. And so it so happened at that moment, he's looking through the first edition of my book, Reclaiming Our Democracy, which we'll talk about later. It was released in 1994, the first edition, which is like 31 years ago. But it was an indication that already at that time, Muhammad Yunus was well known. I'll tell one other quick story related to, it's not really related to my meeting him, but I'm going to tell this story anyway. When Bill Clinton was running for president, he was being interviewed by journalists at a restaurant in Little Rock, Arkansas. And in the interview, the name of the restaurant is Doe's Eat Place. And in the interview, Bill Clinton says in 1990, this is 16 years before receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, Bill Clinton, candidate for President Clinton, says Muhammad Yunus ought to receive the Nobel Prize. And one of the journalists says, how do you even know of him? It's 1990. How'd you even hear of him? And because the journalists knew about him. And he just basically said that a roommate of Hillary Clinton's in college knew Professor Yunus and introduced them to him in the late 80s, basically. And I'm going to tell one more story, and then I'll stop with this little piece of it. When Muhammad Yunus came back, when Hillary Clinton came back to Bangladesh in 1995. She did a trip to
Five or
Bangladesh.
six. It was 5 or 6, something like that.
Yeah, 95 or 96. And she had the journalists that accompanied her meet for lunch at a restaurant across the street from the White House. And I came along to accompany Professor Yunus, and I'm at the bar having a seltzer water while Muhammad Yunus is in the luncheon with Hillary Clinton and these journalists. And the owner of the restaurant, it's an Indian American. He owns 3 fancy restaurants at the time in Washington, D.C. Who's that Asian guy in with Hillary Clinton? And I tell him that it's the founder of Grameen Bank. Hillary came back and she wanted to, from Bangladesh, and wanted to have this luncheon with the journalists who went with her. And I told him about the Microcredit Summit. We will get to that later. And he said, well, what can I do for you? Maybe I could host a breakfast and you can do a briefing. So I'm going to tell this one more story. So he hosts a breakfast at one of his restaurants, a different one. And Muhammad Yunus does his talks. And the first question, a woman raised her hand and said, it's all well and good what you've done in Bangladesh, but you don't understand the culture here in the United States. It's a different culture. And Muhammad Yunus said, well, this is 1995-ish, 96 maybe. He said, well, the culture in Bangladesh is women don't touch money. The culture in Bangladesh is women don't go to this is 31 years ago, women don't go to the marketplace. The culture in Bangladesh is women don't receive loans. We created a new culture. His answer to this woman who said, you don't understand the culture here in the United States was, well, it's an even, let's call it, more strict culture in Bangladesh, and we created a new culture.
Fantastic personal anecdote here, just if I could add. It's like I was a student back in University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh in the early 90s. And basically, this is what I was looking for, the name of this restaurant. I just, I couldn't remember it. I remember vividly watching, because they had taken this piece and shown that in CNN and everywhere. And when they broadcasted that, and I was, part of the Young Democrats in college, and we were all watching together in our commons. So everybody looked at me and he goes, who is he? And I'm like, I don't know who he is. How would I know? I'm a young student from Bangladesh. I have no idea. And then I remember that night calling my mother and saying, who is this gentleman? And then she told me, a little bit about him. And that's the first time I got to know about Professor Yunus.
In the mid-90s.
Sam, in the early 90s, when it was candidate Clinton.
Oh, okay.
Running for his first, campaign.
Okay.
Right. It was candidate Clinton. Or Governor Clinton, right?
Yeah.
So back to our question, Sam. So something that many Bangladeshis and members of our diaspora are not aware of is the 60-minute segment on Grameen Bank, which was aired not once but twice on national TV in the US back in 1990. There was certainly a backstory behind this. How did this come about? And I know you touched a little bit on it in the previous segment, but could you really expand on this, right?
Well, I just want to start with saying in 1990 in the United States, if you were on, normally you're on 60 Minutes covering your face because you don't want, some expose. This was not an expose. But if you were on 60 Minutes in 1990, it was an especially big deal because you didn't have all this podcasts and blogs and cable news and all this other stuff. There was a much more limited area of news. And so actually, when Muhammad Yunus came to our office in 1987 to speak to the editorial writers, on the first call, one of the 14 was not an editorial writer. It was a journalist for it's called the Christian Science Monitor. Kristen Helmore was her name. And at the end of that first hour, she said, can I be on the second call too? And I said, well, you can, just don't ask questions at first. Let the new journalists ask their questions before you did. Well, it was her 4-part series in her newspaper, the Christian Science Monitor, that 60 Minutes read and decided to do this piece on Grameen Bank. I believe it was filmed in 1989 in Bangladesh, and it was aired twice in the United States in 1990, which is a very big deal in terms of coverage and getting known and notoriety. So that 60 Minutes piece was one of the very key elements for Americans. I don't want to suggest everybody knows, but for Americans knowing about Grameen Bank, Muhammad Yunus, microloans, etc.
Because 60 Minutes, I think, at that time was the show, everybody tuned into, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
today, I mean, you can compare what in today's, podcast-wise, something like a Joe Rogan, where hundreds of millions of people are tuning in. So 60 Minutes was, was
Big
that
time.
big at,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah. Yeah.
right. Okay, so let me go on to my next question. It's a bit a lengthy question, so just bear with me. So in 2025, we know that there are more than 300 million Grameen-style beneficiaries benefiting from microcredit programs. But in 1997, you organized the Microcredit Summit Campaign by your organization Results. The summit was attended by 2,900 delegates from 137 countries and launched a campaign to reach 100 million of the world's poorest families, and especially the women of those families, by 2005. We understand that you organized this in collaboration with many individuals, including Professor Yunus. So tell us the whole story behind it, how you did, what were your goals, what was your role, what was Professor Yunus's role, and who were the key players behind it?
Yes. So another key ally of ours at Results was John Hatch, the founder of Finca, a microfinance group originally mostly in Central and Latin America originally. And John Hatch came to a conference of ours calling for a microcredit summit with a goal of reaching 200 million families. And so we shared, both of them were on the Results board. So we shared this goal and a paper that John had written with Muhammad Yunus. And he said, yes, but maybe 100 million, because it was everyone's estimate that the world was already reaching 8 million. So to go from 8 million to 100 million would be a massive. Yunus said, I think 200 million is too much. And I'm going to tell one other story related to the number. Muhammad Yunus was introduced to the new president of the World Bank at the time, the late Jim Wolfenson. And in the meeting, Yunus told him about the upcoming Microcredit Summit. I think it was 19 months away, actually. And about the goal of reaching 100 million of the world's poorest families. And Jim Wolfenson said, no, I think that's too much. And Muhammad said, well, what would you say, 25 million? And Wolfenson said, no, that's too small. And Yunus said, 50 million? And Wolfenson said, yes, 50 million. And Yunus said, well, if you get us to 50 million, we'll have the staffing and infrastructure to get the rest of the way quite easily. And they both agreed in that meeting that 100 million of the world's poorest families was a good goal. And then Wolfenson said, are you coming to hear me speak tonight? And Yunus said, well, I don't have an invitation. And Wolfenson said, I just invited you. So he goes to hear Wolfenson speak to a group, the World Wildlife Fund or some group like that. And in his talk, which is live on C-SPAN, which is one of the TV channels in the United States, Wolfenson talks about the goal of reaching 100 million of the world's poorest families, and and his support for it. And the same day, we received a letter from the head of the UNDP, the UN Development Program, Aspeth, also endorsing that goal. So on this one day, the head of the World Bank and the head of UNDP, one on C-SPAN TV and one in a letter, endorsed this goal of the Microcredit Summit of reaching 100 million of the world's poorest families, especially the women of those families, with credit for self-employment and other financial and business services. And to come to the summit, it wasn't going to be a normal UN summit. It was a civil society organized summit. And at a UN summit, a lot of times it's 2 weeks long and you run around all week trying to change this word or add this phrase or get the final. No, we finalized the declaration and plan of action before the summit. And to come to the summit, you had to agree to the goal and basically the plan. And kind of there was a signing ceremony, et cetera. And so it launched a campaign to reach that goal. And the goal was reached 2 years late, not 2005, but 2007. And I'm going to add this just because I intend to add it completely. We had full cooperation from the Bangladesh ambassador to the UN, Honorable Karim Chaudhry, who was a major player in helping us make the summit a reality, including support from the UN. And the co-chair of the Microcredit Summit was Sheikh Hasina in 1997.
Oh, wow.
1997 is almost 30 years ago, but it was her first term as prime minister. And she was, I think the word might have been honorary co-chair of that first microcredit summit. And we had 5 heads of state and government from Bangladesh, from Peru, from Mali, etc. We had 5 first ladies, United States, El Salvador, etc. And the Queen of Spain and the Queen of Belgium and 2,900 other delegates from around the world. It was quite a remarkable moment. I remember Shafiq ul Haq Chaudhry, the founder of ASHA. It was his first visit to the United States, and it had been snowing around the days of the summit, and that it was new for him. So anyway, it was quite an extraordinary launch, and we reached that goal, but 2 years late.
So that would be the 100 million, right?
That's right. 2007.
This is the story. I mean, majority of Bangladeshis, even I didn't know this. I mean, I mean, obviously we spoke before, so I got to know when we first spoke, but now everybody knows. So this is something that was like a big gap in the history of Bangladesh, that our people don't know what you did, and everybody along with you, all your friends, helped us to get along in a way towards this great achievement.
And let me add one last thing. By 1997, in development circles and other key circles, I didn't get the Queen of Spain and the Queen of Belgium there. Muhammad Yunus did. I didn't get some of these heads of state and first ladies there. Muhammad Yunus did. And
but
so, it was.
You definitely played your part. Otherwise, none of this would have happened. I mean, that is the recognition we want. We should applaud you, the entire Bangladeshi, everybody should applaud. I mean, we don't know your story, right? What you did for us. So that's today's, entire episode is appreciating your stories of how you helped us. I mean, we should all be thanking you. So thank you from Bangladesh, right? So let me open this thing to both of you, Scott and Sam, that if you want to right now add any additional anecdotes, at this moment, some other stories that you'd both like to say together, please go ahead.
Scott, I'll let you take one if you've got one.
Well, I've got in my answers, I'm going to have some. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Let me tell one other story, and then maybe we should turn it over to Scott.
Yes.
It was the early 90s, I believe, and Grameen Bank and Muhammad Yunus were winning the King Baudouin Award, the King of Belgium.
Okay.
And I was on a flight with him, and he said to me in the United States, he said, I've won the King Baudouin Award, and they want me to bring a staff member from Grameen Bank with me to Belgium. He said, I told him, sure, I will bring a staff member, but I also bring one of the borrowers from a village.
Fantastic.
And they said, no, you can't bring a borrower from the village. I said, no, the king should meet one of these women. And so I say to Muhammad Yunus, well, she's probably not been in an airplane before. And his answer was, well, we had a meeting on the second floor with 100 center managers at the headquarters in Dhaka. And we asked the women, who has never been on the second floor before? And almost everyone raised their hand. So his answer was, she's not probably even been on the second floor before, much less in an airplane. And so I was on another flight with him some other time later, and I said, well, how did it go with the King Baudouin Award and bringing the woman from the village to the bank? He said, well, we brought one of the women who was on the board, and we showed her films of, industrialized cities in the country, and we brought a woman from the Grameen staff to accompany her, and she, the borrower, was the biggest hit at the news conference and with the King and Queen of Belgium. And she told the story that before her son died, he asked her for some sweets, but she couldn't afford sweets for her son, a little guy, before he died. And he said, then I joined Grameen Bank and I started my business, and my business is doing very, very well. And now I can buy sweets for all the children in the village. But I couldn't buy sweets for my son before he died. And so it was just another kind of glimpse at the life change and perspective change that Muhammad Yunus has led on.
Fantastic. So now I'd like to shift to Scott. So Scott, other than being involved in microcredit back in the 80s, you were deeply involved with solving for child mortality across the world through very simple solutions. So please tell us more about this trajectory.
Yeah. Before I answer that question, I understand that the audience here is mostly Bangladeshi Americans, some other of the diaspora, and they're keen on democracy in Bangladesh and reforms. Now, at the end of this podcast, if your listeners are thinking, well, that's great, it's nice that there are people like Sam and Scott, doing stuff, then I will have failed. Now, Sam is a visionary. His gift is that he knows what the next thing to do is. And I think most people will be able to identify with me in that I just want to help. I want to be useful. I have caught the vision, and I want to help move the ball down the field. And the goals of your audience are not going to happen by accident. So I don't know if you've thought about organizing yourselves, but these goals are not going to happen, by accident. And so hopefully at the end of this podcast, the listeners will be able to say, well, gee, I could do stuff like that. In fact, that sounds
exactly.
So my story began September 30th, 1985. And I remember the date because my life has not been the same since. So at the time, I was 32, and I was a surgery resident at the University of Utah. So I was training to be a surgeon, and I was invited to a meeting, and for some reason I went to the meeting rather than getting some sleep. And there were two women from Los Angeles with results who came to Salt Lake City and told me that 40,000 children were dying daily from preventable causes, for lack of an immunization for lack of 2 cents worth of vitamin A, because mothers didn't know the value of breastfeeding. I mean, simple stuff. And it was an epiphany for me. And I'm kind of embarrassed to admit it, but my thinking at the time was that if there were big problems that had solutions, somebody would take care of it. You know, our political leaders or somebody rich, like Elon Musk. Well, maybe not Elon Musk, but somebody rich would just take care of it. And that I realized that no, that's not the way things get done. It's when people get organized and make it good politics to make things happen. Now, also that night, I was told there are things that I could do to help reduce this needless tragedy. Things like learning the issues, writing letters to the editor of my newspaper, writing letters to my congressman, meeting with my congressman, meeting with editorial writers. And those sounded like things I could do. In fact, it seemed like it would be fun. So that night, I wrote my very first letter to my congressman. And when the evening was over, I was the new group leader of results in my city. And the very first campaign that we were engaged in Salt Lake City was what Sam referred to earlier, was we wanted to increase the amount of money in an account in our foreign aid from 25 million to 75 million a year. And that was called the Child Survival Fund. And so we wanted to triple that amount of money. And that went toward things like I referred to: immunizations, vitamin A, promotion of breastfeeding, oral rehydration therapy, which was invented in Bangladesh. So we made appointments with our members of Congress. We wrote letters to the editor. We met with editorial writers. We had two, we still do have two newspapers in Salt Lake, and both wrote editorials on topics they would never have known about if it weren't for us going in to talk to them. And so they both wrote beautiful editorials, and we would send them to Sam, and he would send them 4 or 5 at a time, because there were 60 groups in the US working on the same thing. And I remember the response from an aide to Senator Orrin Hatch, who was a longtime senator from Utah. And his aide called us and told us, just forget it. There's no money. There's not going to be any more money for this fund. Just forget it. And one of our volunteers was in tears. And what resulted was that the Child Survival Fund was increased from 25 million to 75 million. And most every year since then, we've lobbied Congress. We've got bipartisan support. It's transformed into what's called the Maternal and Child Health Account, and is now funded at more than $900 million a year. So what's happened with this 40,000 child deaths, preventable child deaths a day, it's been reduced down to about 13,000 a day. Huge improvement, but it's not zero. But public health officials tell us that that can be reduced to zero by 2035 if we put the necessary resources to it. So that's the best news that nobody's heard of.
Yeah. If I could add one thing to what you just said, was the oral rehydration therapy, the simple mixture of sugar, salt, water, baking soda to prevent dehydration, developed in Bangladesh, as you said. Well, the Lancet, the British medical journal, called ORT potentially the medical advance of the century back in the late 70s, number one. And number two, the child death rate from dehydration, primarily because of the development of oral rehydration therapy in Bangladesh, has gone from 5 million a year to 500,000 deaths a year, a 90% reduction compared to the early 1980s. So it's another unknown story, really.
Guys, it looks like Casey's connection has an issue, so I'm gonna continue until Casey joins back. So going back to Scott's story, can you tell us more about how your story with Bangladesh started?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So as a results volunteer, I was, lobbying my members of Congress, while other volunteers in other states lobbied theirs. And one of the issues that we took up was microcredit, and talking about the Grameen Bank, and that we should set aside some money in our foreign aid for this type of activity. So I went with a group of results volunteers to Bangladesh in 1992. And they're pictured there is, believe it or not, I'm the one on the right. It's been a rough life, but, and there's Yunus. And so we got to meet with him. Yunus did something crazy, just very unusual. I mean, unheard of. And I don't know if your listeners know his story, but he was a Fulbright scholar at Vanderbilt University, got his PhD in economics, and then started teaching economics at Middle Tennessee State. And then the Civil War happened, and he's very active as a student, in the, from abroad, he was active. And then in 1972, he gave up his life in the US to go back to help his new country. Very patriotic. So he goes back and he becomes a professor of economics at Chittagong University. And so he's teaching there. He's an academic. And then the famine of 74 happens, and people are dying left and right. He's, having to step over bodies to get to his classroom. And he's feeling pretty worthless. These theories that he teaches in the classroom seem to have no impact on the people of his country. And so he decides to go out into the village next to the university and see if he can be of help. He thought, if I could help one person, that would make my life worthwhile. So he finds a woman named Sophia Khatun, and she makes bamboo stools, to sit on, and is very skillful, has a beautiful product. He asked her, well, how much money do you make? And she says, 2 cents a day. And he can't believe this. Somebody so skillful can only make 2 cents a day. And, why is that? And so she says that, well, I don't have the capital to buy the bamboo. I'm dependent on a trader who gives me the bamboo in exchange for the finished product at a price he fixes. So her profit is only 2 cents a day. And so he asks her, well, could you make more money if you sold it yourself in the market, if you had the capital to buy the bamboo? And she said, well, of course. And so he loaned her, didn't give her, but loaned her $6. And her income went immediately from 2 cents a day to $1.25. And she was now able to feed her daughter 3 meals a day instead of 1. She was able to send her daughter to school, and she was able to put a tin roof on her house to keep the rain out. So he had graduate students, and they quickly found 42 people that needed a total of $26. He went to the banks and said, you know, we've got a big problem here. You need to loan these people money. And they said, are you stupid? Are you an idiot? You can't loan poor people money without collateral. So eventually, this resulted in Yunus creating the Grameen Bank, which was chartered in 1983, just a couple years before Sam heard about it. So we get to Dhaka, the results volunteers, and we break up into 2s and 3s and go to villages throughout Bangladesh. We want to go and see if this Grameen Bank thing is real. You know, it seems too good to be true. We want to, you know, learn how the bank works so that we have more credibility when we talk to people about, you know, and promote this idea of microcredit. So I'm standing there in the middle, and we're in a village about 2 hours drive outside of Chittagong. And in the middle is a results volunteer from Washington, D.C., Marilyn Kodish. And on the right is a reporter from the Washington Post that Marilyn invited to come with us. And her name is Molly Moore. So we walk around the villages with the bank workers. We live with the bank workers. We interview the women borrowers. Here's a picture that I took of the borrowers. They meet weekly to make their weekly repayments. And I knew that when I saw it, I felt like what it must be like to have been in Thomas Edison's laboratory. You know, I just knew this was going to be a big deal. Now, we finished up, we got back to Dhaka, and then we traveled home. And we were on PIA, and we flew from Dhaka to Karachi. And we've got a layover in Karachi, and I'm wandering around the airport, and most things are closed, but there's a newspaper magazine shop open. And so I go there and start looking, you know, just trying to kill some time. And I look up, and there's an older gentleman there. And maybe you can go to the next photo. Okay, this, let's come back to this one if we could. Maybe go to the forward, the one with McNamara.
Okay, let me do that.
Yeah.
Just give me a second.
So
this one?
No, maybe there. Okay.
Okay.
So I look up, and they're standing in shorts with the New York Times, Sunday New York Times under his arm is Robert McNamara. And for those that don't know who he was the Secretary of Defense for both Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, and then became World Bank president for 13 years. And and the purpose of the World Bank is to end poverty. So I'm kind of taken aback, and I say, "Oh, you're Robert McNamara." And he smiled and said yes, and we chatted for a few minutes, and he left. And then it turns out he's on the same flight that I am from Karachi to Brussels. And so I'm mad at myself because I just spent all this time with Yunus, and I know about the Grameen Bank, and this guy's a big player. I can't imagine his Rolodex. And, he's past president of the World Bank. He can make things happen. And I had this chance, and I blew it. And so I get on the plane, and Sam has taught me and all the volunteers to create 2-minute talks, laser talks. Some people call them elevator talks, because people won't listen to you for more than 2 minutes. So you just put it out there. And so I create in my mind a 2-minute talk, just in case I get another chance to see McNamara. So the plane lands in Brussels and to refuel. This is 1992. And so they let us off the plane. So I hurry and look for McNamara, and I spot him, and he's going into the men's bathroom. And so I follow him into the bathroom, and I maneuver my way so that I am at the urinal next to his.
Do we train this in results also?
This was ad lib. So luckily, due to his age, I was able to get through my entire 2-minute talk about Yunus and the Grameen Bank. And he says to me, I think I've read something about that. And I'm sure it was Molly Moore's article, which appeared in the Washington Post on the front page. So on that day, I did my job as a citizen. I folded the old man into the bathroom.
Thank you. That's a wonderful story. Can we go on to the next one, which is more precisely how did you advocate for microcredit in the U.S.?
Yes.
Well, you answered a little bit, but how did you work? Who did you work with? And tell us about how you worked to get support from U.S. Congress. Yeah. I mean, we were thinking, because you had explained to us some very specific things that you did, right? So yes. This was one of them, I suppose. So if you could add a little.
Yeah. Well, one last thing about McNamara. So we held a couple preparatory meetings before the Microcredit Summit, and I helped Sam with those. And at the second preparatory meeting, I looked out in the audience, and there was Robert McNamara.
Wow. So your little 2-minute in the urinal actually worked out.
It seems, yes.
Fantastic. Yeah. Fantastic.
So in 92, in November of that year, we had a new U.S. Senator elected in Utah. So if we could show the picture of Senator Bennett. So within a week, within a week of his election, I go down to his campaign office, and I bring my TV, my portable TV, and it had a slot in there for VHS tapes. So I popped in the tape, the 60 Minutes tape of Yunus and Grameen Bank. And I showed him this, and he's never heard of microcredit before. And he's impressed. He likes it, likes the idea. So I tell him I want him to get on the Foreign Operations Subcommittee of Appropriations in the Senate. Now, he forgets about this part, but later he's on that committee and or subcommittee. And so I meet with them every year, at least once. And so he loves the idea. And when he leaves the Senate, he says one of the three things he's most proud of was his work on microfinance. And you can show the other picture. By the way, I was standing on a chair on that previous photo. Bennett was 6'7", so I was standing on a chair. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So he was showing off. Here he's showing off. He purchased this from a microcredit borrower on a USAID funded microcredit program in Morocco. So he was showing that off. So that's what we did to help advance funding from Congress.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. Wonderful, wonderful story. So you had a fantastic part to play in advancing microcredit and to help Bangladesh as well. So I'm thankful that you did all this for us. Yeah. So can we go back to Sam now? So Sam, we want to discuss a little bit about your book, and you were kind enough to send it to us. So in your book, Reclaiming Our Democracy, you mentioned two concepts of transformational advocacy and transactional advocacy. And you make the case that transformational advocacy is what stands to create most impact. For our listeners, can you expand on what those two concepts mean?
Sure. So transformational advocacy is when you work to change an issue and you're changed in the process. And most people know transactional, sign the petition, transaction complete. But with transformational advocacy, you're trained, encouraged, and succeed at doing things as an advocate you never thought you could do, like meet with a member of Congress and bring them on board to your issue, or write a letter to the editor on something you care about and have it published. And when you do those things you thought you couldn't do, you see yourself differently. That's the transformation in how you see yourself. And I'm going to give you one simple, quick example. I write in the book, Reclaiming Our Democracy, about Maxine Thomas from Indiana. And she said to me, I had a heart for service, but I was clueless about advocacy, especially political advocacy. She joins Results, the anti-poverty lobby, and gets training. And after a full day of first ever meetings with her members of Congress, she said, I was euphoric. I was on this high and felt I was part of something revolutionary. So from I was clueless to I was euphoric, that is transformational advocacy.
Fantastic, because I'm glad you explained that, because we were basically, I was doing the other thing all my life, and now I think our alliance is transformational, right? What we're doing. So that's how we would describe ourselves. Is that?
Well, here's what I don't know all the ingredients of the alliance, but if the alliance has training, and maybe it's something you do have or something you can add, How do you write a letter to the editor? Or how do you meet with your member of parliament or member of Congress to bring Bangladesh up on their priority
I
of
see.
issues?
So we
So,
need to integrate that piece of work
yeah,
within our
so the
work.
training piece and also a call to action piece. What is the topic of the letters to the editor? What is the ask in a meeting with my member of Congress or their staff? So there might be a couple little ingredients that need to be added, but surely, this webinar is one ingredient for sure, and the training to take effective action would be another.
No, thank you very much for this explanation. So this is something I think our alliance members would definitely want to add that little bit of ingredient to take things much further, right? I just want to add something that because it's a stormy season now in Bangladesh, so we had because of the storm, I had a little bit of electricity failure, so I think I dropped out for a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
And I'm back on again, so sorry about that. So Sam, on to the next question. So you know very well that the youth of BD led the revolution this last year. Our youth right now are changed and very deeply involved in advocacy and civic engagement. But they have a lot to learn from you, and your pioneering advocacy on microcredit has had great impact in Bangladesh. From your perspective, what is a blueprint that the younger generation of Bangladesh can follow?
Well, so let me say it this way. I mean, when I'm giving a talk, I urge people to look for three things in an organization that's delivering transformational advocacy. And I would hope that the youth would form an organization that works to do these three things, that works to deliver transform. And one is recruitment and bringing new people in. Recruitment, bringing new people in, not just to build an e-blast list only, but forming them into local chapters so they do this work. They're not doing it alone. So the recruitment and community building is part of number one. Community building might include like a monthly webinar for everyone with guest speakers and Q&A and inspiration. So recruitment and community building. Two, training. We've talked about that before. How do you get the meeting? How do you ask for the meeting? What do you ask for in the meeting? Two, training. And three, the organization encourages breakthroughs, encourages you to do things as a citizen that you never thought you could do, like meet with an elected official and bring them on board to your issue. So, hopefully there are organizations that will train people to do these kinds of things. Let me give you one other thing. When I'm coaching a group that's meeting with a member of parliament who opposes their issue, I hope I have them ask three questions. One, we know you don't support this. What would it take to change your mind? And you're listening for assignments. What would it take to change your mind? Two, could you say more about that? Three, why do you think that is? So it's a deep listening exercise. And I've seen lots of big change with volunteers who've been patient and willing to ask those questions and keep coming back and keep coming back.
Fantastic, Sam. I mean, this, I think, is the biggest takeaway for me for tonight. I mean, this is, what can I say? Mainul, would you have anything to say here? Are you there, Mainul?
Yes, I have two more questions, last probably to both Sam and Scott. I'm definitely curious to know, why did you create Friends of Bangladesh?
Well, let me go just before Friends of Bangladesh. The world was horrified in about 2010, 2011, when Muhammad Yunus was being removed as managing director of Grameen Bank because he was 70 years old and the 77-year-old finance minister was saying he was too old at age 70 to head up Grameen Bank. So there were these mobilizations back in 2010, 2011, and then there were other times where a number of leaders were just horrified by how he was being treated. So bring us now to 2022 July. We launch again as he's being attacked, Protect Yunus. And so from July of 2022, Protect Yunus meets every week for, well, in July this year, it'll be 3 years, to strategize ways to lift up his case. And frankly, it was one of the editorial writers that Scott has become in relationship with, Jay Evenson at the Deseret News in Utah, who wrote the first piece in the United States on that latest round of attacks. So we were operating as as Protect Yunus for nearly 2 years. And then in the, I don't know, we never expected it, the occurrences in July and especially early August of last year, when Yunus became the interim prime minister, essentially, Protect Yunus morphed into Friends of Bangladesh, because we were less interested in protecting him because he wasn't needing it at that point. But, you know, we were organizing those letters that were signed by more than 100 Nobel laureates and other leaders from around the world in the previous incarnation. And so, so that gives you a sense of where Protect Yunus came from.
Scott, do you have any context here?
Where Friends of Bangladesh came from.
Yes. Jay Evenson, who Sam mentioned, I first took Yunus to meet Jay in 1997, when Yunus was here in Salt Lake City. And so Jay was immediately taken with Yunus's story. And whenever Yunus would come to town, I would take Yunus down to meet with him. And then when we couldn't get any Western media to report about the danger that Yunus was facing of imprisonment, we couldn't, all the Western media was, they were pretty much, well, let us know when he's in jail and then we'll write about it. And so we wanted to prevent that. And so we went to Jay, and he wrote about it. And nowadays, you get something printed anywhere, and it can be magnified on social media. So that's what happened. His editorial was retweeted and got visibility, and that started the ball rolling. And so the Deseret News, his bosses, became aware of the role that they had played with helping protect Yunus. And so they actually sent, which is kind of unheard of, sent Jay and a photographer to interview Yunus on February 26th of this year at the Jamuna guest house, as you can see in the pictures there.
Awesome. My next question is, can you tell us a little bit more about how Friends of Bangladesh working in a post-July Revolution era, to both of you?
Yeah, well, the bottom line is that we're constantly looking for ways that we can support Bangladesh 2.0 and the new vision for the country. One of the things, and I think you might put this in the program notes, that the Martyrs Fund for those who were killed in the revolution, those who were the families of those who were killed, for those who were injured in the revolution. The Martyrs Fund, set up in Bangladesh, I believe Mohammed Yunus is the chair of the Martyrs Fund, is providing funds to those who were injured or killed in the revolution. So one of the things that we've done is we've arranged for your ability to get tax deductible, to donate tax deductibly in the United States, Australia, Germany, the United Kingdom, and the like. And you of course can contribute to the Martyrs Fund from any country. It's just that certain ones you would also get a tax deduction. So one of the things that we do is that we promote this so that those who stood up, those who were injured, the families of those who were killed, have some support to move forward in their lives. And then other than that, we're just constantly on the lookout for ways we can be supportive.
Yeah. We monitor the media, and as you are well aware, there's been a lot of disinformation, and because there are forces out there that don't wish Yunus and the interim government to be successful. So we do our best to combat that.
With that, I think we almost come to an end of our podcast. Any last word from any of you?
Thank you for what you're doing and what your members and participants, stakeholders are doing. It's really, really important.
I'd also like to say that, a famous piece of advice is never meet your heroes. And I think many of us have done that, and
it's fallen flat. Let's put it.
Yeah, it's hard to live up to expectations for many of us. But I can tell you, I've known Yunus for more than 3 decades. He's the real deal. Mm-hmm. And he walks the talk. He's the real thing. I believe that he is the, Hegel talked about world historic figures. I believe he's one of those. I think he's the Gandhi, the Martin Luther King of our time. So I'm extremely proud to be his friend, and Bangladeshis can be very proud of him, and he's just a jewel and a patriot.
Beautiful, beautiful last words. Thank you so much. Sam, do you want to add anything else to this?
No, or? I think Scott said it well, and we're grateful to be with you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate both of you, giving us this time and telling us these wonderful stories. And these were, to me, at the end, it wasn't just stories anymore. Some of these were inspirations to us, especially, the questions that I asked you about what the students could take away, not the students, basically, the youth could take away. But I think us Alliance members are going to learn a lot from your, the points, your giveaways. I mean, that's fantastic. So thank you again, both of you. And Minor, with that, would you like to close and say some last words?
Yes. Thank you so much for coming to our podcast. This is really helpful. We learned a lot of stories of Dr. Professor Yunus from early years. Even I was not aware of a lot of things, but this is definitely insightful. And obviously, we should, on top of what we learned, we should move forward to a better Bangladesh 2.0. With that, let's wrap up this conversation. Thank you again for joining to our podcast, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.